welcome everybody once again back to the Buffalo History Channel. Like as always, thank you for your continued support. We're still posting, getting as much content up as possible. Hopefully you had a chance to see the behind the mural where we showed the dedication of the John Young Memorial King of Wings mural, as well as what else did we have? You know, sometimes you post so many videos, you lose track of them. But we also premiered, that's right, we premiered a brand new segment called The Very Best of Afro Central, which was featured in our last original production, The Soul of Buffalo TV, and it has some amazing footage from the late 70s into the early 1980s. We showed a feature on some of the staffing and programming changes at radio station WUFO, and certainly you can see how far it's come where it stands today in the city of Buffalo. But speaking of original productions, our last original production was on the mayoral campaign of Ambrose Lane. Ambrose Lane is a Buffalo legend through and through. Many of you I know had a chance to watch it, and I am very honored to have the members of his family, his children, right here on the Buffalo History Channel. I'd like to welcome Ingrid. Hi. Alcy, did I say it?
Elise.
Elise. Spencer and Ambrose Lane Jr. Welcome, Lane family, to the Buffalo History Channel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it is certainly wonderful to have you on here, and I just want to open it up by saying, you know, back when I started documenting history of Buffalo as well as Black Buffalo, there would hardly be a time that would go by or a subject that, because I didn't do a lot of political stories. I didn't really do any, really. But somewhere within my research or in talking to people, pillars of the community, one name would always come up no matter what. That name was your father, Ambrose.
Yeah. Wow.
I can tell you, people over the years have spoken so highly of your dad, whether it was a political campaign, people would write, Ted Kirkland or somebody would write articles. They would mention your father in debates. So when Ambrose Lane was the first Black man to run for Buffalo mayor, everybody from Ted Kirkland to Arthur O.E., everybody had nothing but wonderful things to say about your father.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, can you share some of, I mean, you all were young at the time that he was running for mayor. Certainly that's not his first stint with working in the community. Share some of your reflections about, you know, what was it like growing up while your father was involved in Buffalo's community?
Well, it was kind of a double-edged sword because, of course, we were very, very proud of him. You know, and having grown up with him, you knew that he was a great intellect. You know, he was the smartest, most well-read man I'd ever met. And you knew he was a kind person and he had tremendous integrity, you know, but at the same time, his fame brought a lot of attention to us that we didn't necessarily want. Because I can remember at age 12, people asking me to take positions on the issues that he was running on, and I didn't have a clue. All I knew was that I really loved my dad and he was the greatest possible person that you could have as mayor. But it was a really interesting time. It was a really interesting time. And I'm really glad to hear that people are still bringing up his name because he really loomed large in our imaginations always. And I will yield the floor.
Well, we lived on Butler Avenue. Okay. For the moment, there was one street that we lived on prior to Butler Avenue, but we primarily lived on Butler Avenue. And just to share the story, I remember coming home from school on the bus, and I remember that a gang came on the bus, and here I am with my friend Bernard, and we were on our way home, and the gang basically was going to initiate us into the gang. Oh yeah, this happened. So
no, I remember those days. I remember that.
So the other thing is that our street, Butler Avenue, was a dividing line between two other gangs.
Right.
Okay.
Do you remember what the name of those gangs were?
Oh, yes.
Niners.
So
The 49ers.
49ers.
Yep, it was the 49ers. There was the Ala Turks and the Mad Dogs.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, I remember you up to school 74, that was one gang territory. And then when you went up towards Ferry, that was another gang territory. But nonetheless, so here I am on the bus, and they want to initiate us against our will into the gang. They asked my friend Bernard what is his name, and he told him his name, and they actually took him off the bus.
Wow.
And they asked me my name. I said, my name is Ambrose Lane. They said, oh, that's Mr. Lane's son alone.
I have a similar story. I was walking through the neighborhood in the evening, and I heard these two guys talking about me from across the street. And I heard one guy tell the other guy, you better stay away from her. That's Mr. Lane's daughter. So he had a lot of respect in the neighborhood.
Sure.
Well,
Dad used to go through the neighborhood. Go ahead.
I'm going to just share this last story about Ingrid, right? So there was a gang leader that lived on our street. And he did something where he did something to Ingrid, did nothing physically, but really was threatening her, trying to do this, that, and the other. My father took his shotgun to his house. My father told me the story. He took the shotgun to his house, and my father was 6'5", and at that time he was 6'5" and 280.
Yeah, I can look at pictures of him and tell you.
Big his nickname in college was Hoss. Okay, that should let you know. So he went to the guy's house. Guy answered the door, and my father said, "If you ever, I'll take you out." and he left my older sister alone. I know that.
Well, Dad used to tell me this story where he would go through the neighborhoods and and if he saw guys, throwing trash around and doing crazy things, he would ask them, why would you do this to a place where you live? And he would have conversations with them about, being able to take care of one another and to take care of the neighborhoods in which we live and the people who live there. And so, he was a figure within the neighborhood and the community. For sure.
We often talk about law and order, but if you give minorities a piece of action in this country, I think that's the best law and order could ever come about. And when you have something, you can protect it. I often said that if we could take and give people like Ambrose here $500,000 to expend, you'd see how careful he was. He'd become an instant banker in the city.
Okay, Spencer, you have anything to share?
Yeah, you have to remember that I was 4 when he ran.
Oh wow, yeah.
Okay. I was 4 years old. But I remember seeing all the paraphernalia around the house, and one of the things I always kind of gravitated to when we were kids is they made a coloring book.
Yeah, that's right.
A coloring book of us and my dad that they were distributing for the campaign, I believe.
Yeah.
And I think the picture of me, I was probably in the picture 1 year old, and it was always around the house. It was like my baby picture. So I remember those things. Of course, as we talked about off camera before we started, here I am 57 years old, and I live in Chicago, and I still get people walking up to me and saying, "Oh, you're Mr. Lane. You're Ambrose Lane's son from Buffalo or from DC," and I've gotten that in my entire life. It's been nonstop, and to hear it still is just an amazing testament to his impact on the community.
And I get the same thing because I'm, my father after moving from Buffalo to DC, he was on the radio WPFW specifically 35 years. So as I matriculated through Howard University into the community, everywhere I went, even to this day, people would tell me when they hear my name that how much they used to listen to my dad. And for a while, I'll be quite frank, for a while, it was like, really? I actually didn't like it. And then I grew to a point where it was a badge of honor. You know, because I was his namesake. As a matter of fact, my first two sons, I named something different because I didn't want them to have the burden of Ambrose Lane the third. And because it is a burden. Don't get me wrong, it is. Because you're living up to something. Okay. Just like, you know, there are other famous people who have sons that are named after them. You can hear their stories. So, you know, by the time that I was really past my college days and doing community work, it became something different. It became something where, you know, I was proud to live up to that name. And now I have a third son who is Ambrose III.
Okay. So how long were you in living in the city of Buffalo? When did you move away from Buffalo?
We went away in 1975.
Right before that big storm that hit Buffalo, I believe it. I think 100,000 people left the city.
Yeah, y'all left just in time.
Just in time.
Yeah, he used to always say that he left Buffalo one day because it was a big snowstorm. He started seeing lightning and hearing thunder. He said, "That's it. There's only that was the story."
What's the tornado watches in Buffalo? That was always something.
Right.
Yeah, he was. If that was the case, he was very smart to leave because the 77, at least. I mean, I was like 5 years old, so I didn't have to get out. At least I didn't have. All I know is when I was little, and I didn't have to get out there and shovel in. I could sit in the house and watch cartoons. but I was in kindergarten when the blizzard of '77 hit, and I can just. Yeah. And my memories of it is just being at home, and if we wasn't watching the cartoons, I was watching Roots with the family because that actually came on TV right around that time.
After the election, he started an organization called the Black Development Foundation.
Yes.
And I guess it was an effort to carry on some of the work that he started with the Community Action Organization. But it became evident over time that the powers that be in Buffalo did not want my dad to be in a position to run for mayor again because his organization had a lot of difficulty getting funding from the banks.
Right.
And so he actually made the decision to leave that organization so that they would have a better opportunity to be successful, because he felt like for political reasons they were being stymied. And so that led to his opportunity was the Nationals. Chip, do you remember the name of it?
Yes. So he went to work for Jimmy Carter, the National Center for Community Action. And the National Center for Community Action was over all of the community action organizations across the country, including Puerto Rico and Guam. So he was leading that. And he was also, again, as he was editor and publisher of The Challenger, he was also editor and publisher of the New Spirit magazine, which is what was produced by the National Center for Community Action. So he was always a writer. Always a writer as long as I can remember. And one of the best writers I have ever known. And wrote several books. I know that you mentioned one in the documentary, but he's written several books.
Yeah, I actually did discover that a little bit later on that there were like a bunch of other books that he's writing. I was like, wow. Right. You talked about his radio show, and actually I stumbled across that online. It was called We Ourselves.
Right.
And I had a chance, they had some audio clips. I listened to a couple of them. One that he did, which was a tribute to Dr. King.
Right.
Okay. I had a chance to hear his voice, and it was he definitely had a voice for radio. Very distinctive, barreling voice. I was like, okay.
Part of that came because, number one, he was a baritone operatic singer.
Yes.
The other thing,
we actually have a video of him on the Ed Sullivan Show.
No, it wasn't the Ed Sullivan show.
No, which one was it?
It was I think it was called the Ted Mack Amateur Hour.
Yeah,
Ted Mack back Amateur. In the 50s.
Right.
Wow. He appeared on that show because as a young man, he was torn between wanting to be a lawyer and wanting to be a professional singer because he had a beautiful voice. And so he went on, the Ted Mack Amateur Hour, which was what's the show now that they have, The Voice? It was the
Voice,
version of The Voice
Right,
that
right.
was around back in those days, and he actually won.
Yeah.
On the television, didn't he?
Didn't win it.
He won a television that he gifted to his mom. So he was very, very talented.
And his hero was Paul Robeson, which is why he
Yes.
did the operatic piece. His hero was Paul Robeson.
I can see that.
Yeah, and we
definitely
grew
has
up
a
listening to
Paul Robeson
all
vibe to
kinds
him.
of music.
But I want to share with you where We Ourselves came from. So We Ourselves, the name of his radio show, actually was a proposal that he written and actually submitted to Hubert Humphrey. It was something that he submitted that was about the creation of community action organizations around the country. And that was the gist of the We Ourselves proposal. So
wasn't that something that he presented to Congress?
yes, it was presented.
Yeah, it was a Congressman Dulski was the congressman who had it written into the congressional record.
That's right.
And it was actually highlighted in the New York Times at the time.
Yep.
Ambrose, I know you ran for office.
I did.
And so certainly he had influence.
Oh, absolutely.
Any type of advice that he gave you maybe early on before his passing?
It wasn't so much advice. Well, yeah, there was a couple things. He told me, because he was here in DC and for so long on the radio, he knew certain people. And he did tell me who I should contact if I ever wanted to run for political office. But the other thing that he told me this long before. He said, no matter what you do, never lose your integrity. It's the one thing that no one can take away from you.
Right. So how has your father, and any of you can chime in on this, how has your father influenced you to be involved? You're all living in different parts of the country.
Sure.
How has he influenced you to be involved in your communities?
Well, but both my parents were very, very political, and so they always told us to be active and to really be committed to freedom and justice and so forth. And so I think all of us have in some ways, shape, or form become activists in our own ways. I work on climate change issues. And one of the things my father said before he died, he asked me, when are you going to write? And I had pretty much decided that I wasn't going to write. And after that conversation with him, I had to step back and think about, that question, and I started to write. And so, our parents have always told us, always had us believing in fighting for justice. And that's what we've always done. I think it just comes second nature. When we get together and we have our family conversations, we're always talking politics, and that's part of the legacy of kind of parenting that we got from both my father and my mother.
That's right.
Anyone else?
Well, I mean, he was a leader in, I guess, political and social issues, but he also managed people, right? And so, for me, my leadership showed up as in my corporate world, where I managed a lot of people and was in a position to hire and promote, Black people within the organization, and to go into spaces that, Black people usually didn't find themselves. I can't tell you how many times I'd call and make an appointment and tell them my name was Ingrid, and they'd be surprised to see a Black woman walk into the office. But that, that's part of, being a Black leader too.
Believe it or not, I've gotten that. People hear my name and think I'm a white man. Look at him like,
well, they definitely believe that about my name. It's hilarious.
Yeah, well, you got Ingrid. My name is Spencer, which sounds damn British.
Ambrose is kind of British too.
Right. So you have to show up in all the spaces you're in as a leader, showing that you have a right to be there. And yes, I'm bringing others along with me. So it manifests in all those ways.
Yeah, I mean, that's a method I think area is Black professionals. So many times we're the first or one of the first in our communities. I'm an engineer by trade. And my first job was in New Orleans working in a rural chemical plant. And when I was there, of course, I'm the first Black engineer they ever seen. So you've got to go through that struggle, and that struggle, pushes you towards some level of leadership. While I was there, I was one of the principals in the National Assembly of Black Engineers. And I've stayed with that organization off and on over the past several decades, I should say. And more to the point, more recently, since the George Floyd incidents, we've had these whole inclusion diversity issues in the corporate realm and outside of the corporate realm. And I've been drawn into that, not only for my particular school district, but also internally within the corporation that I work for. And so, we always have this legacy having to speak towards issues of Black inclusion and freedom and relevance in our particular venues. So, and we're buttressed by our parents' legacy and the things we've been taught when we were growing up to take that leadership mantle and hold it proudly.
One of the things that my father, I think, taught us, because he was fearless. I mean, he was fearless, and he could invoke a sense of fear in you.
I remember distinctly driving with Daddy, and we got stopped by the police, and the officer, asked, when the officer came up to the window, Dad asked, "Why are you stopping me?" And the officer, and he was very, Dad was big, and he was and he had used his, that powerful voice, and the officer was flummoxed. And it became apparent that he realized that he stopped the wrong person. and so, and it just backed off of whatever he thought he was going to do. And when the officer drove off, Dad watched him drove off and just cracked up. He just laughed. Yes. And my father laughed with his entire body. So it wasn't like he giggled or just ha ha ha. He slapping his knee. Because he had that kind of presence that was, he and it's not to say that people who get stopped don't. And I'm not trying to make any claim about, the police and the ways in which they harass African-American men and but my father had a presence that stopped people in certain ways, and it was interesting to watch, but he stepped into himself in ways that made you understand that when you were encountering him, you were encountering a very powerful person.
And you hear him on radio, you get that sense.
Yeah.
Because fearlessness wasn't just in life. He was fearless to take on politics and take on the political system. And what's ironic is that both me and my sister now are on radio. We're both on radio right now.
Oh, okay.
And we try to exhibit that same level of fearlessness in terms of the subject matter that we talk about. I remember my father saying, "Never open your mouth unless you know what it is you're going to talk about."
Yeah, right. That's how I was taught. On the radio. Because I've seen people do it. Don't know.
Where there's political discussion all the time.
Yeah.
In between the moments of family, and we were encouraged to express ourselves and ask questions. We were always encouraged to do that. Right. And so we've grown up, and it's not just my father. My mother was fearless too. I'm
definitely.
And so they made, not just because of their personality, but they made a choice.
Yeah.
They would rear us in a way that made us fearless. If there's anything, he held back until we were grown and flown out of the house. If anything.
Really?
I think his politics became more radical. I mean, and because Dad used to always, and Dad used to, he would trace these right wing nuts that we see today, and he was always offering a very anti-fascist critique. He would always call these people fascists, and I used to always think that he was just kind of being one of the leftists is kind of exaggerates things, and everything that we see that has unfolded is precisely what he talked about 20 years ago.
Now, what do you think he would be like with these last couple of administrations? Just from listening to y'all, that should be interesting.
Well, people right now, and when I start, I started radio. I was on before doing a hip hop show, 20 years ago, but I recently came back on radio, and the same radio station, and people are asking me, they're telling me, hey, you're following in your father's footsteps with the subject matter that I'm talking about. And I'm sure that Elise is getting it as well out of New York, because some of his programming was played on the different Pacific stations around the country.
Yeah.
In particular, during the Bush era, he was saying and raising the flag of fascism even then. And so we're not talking about something that's recent. So I can't imagine how he would have eviscerated Donald Trump right now.
Yeah, but Dad did a kind of he did a lot of reading.
Yeah.
And he did the kind of programming that I would say is like power mapping. He didn't just talk about who was doing what, but he would talk about their ties to corporations, talk about ties to fascist organizations, talk about ties, and so that you wouldn't have just gotten a critique of Donald Trump, for example. You would have seen lines to perhaps the fossil fuel industry and executives there, and he would not have stopped. And he remembered in detail what people did back in 1973 and what they started and how it evolved to this point. It was extraordinary. I always felt like I had to read after I talked to my father. And I read a lot.
That's right. Greetings to all of you members of the Progressive Cabinet. I'm sorry I can't be there with you, but I'm sure you're going to take care of business. Back in 1972, the corporate giants in this country were so upset with Richard Nixon, who had sponsored the EPA, that they decided to get together and make certain that no one would ever challenge them again. Here is one of their own who had challenged them. And so they formed the Big Business Roundtable in 2 years. And since that time, they have taken over our government. This now is controlled by the corporate world. When Mussolini was asked about the definition of fascism, he said, you ought to change the name to corporatism. And that's where we are today. In 1994, with Newt Gingrich in charge of the House, we had a gentleman to offer him several millions of dollars to write his memoirs. And as a result, we had the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and we now have about 5 corporations that control almost everything that we see, hear, and read, because they also bought up most of the publishing houses. And as a result, we're in a terrible bind in this country. And so as FCC Commissioner, one of the first things I would do is sponsor a repeal of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. That's where we ought to go. We ought to make certain that they understand that their control of this government is at an end. And that's where the progressive movement must take us. Because unless we do that, we're going to become a full-blown fascist state. We're on the way to doing that right now. So make certain that you take care of business. I'm sorry I can't be with you.
He was the smartest person I've ever known.
Yeah, absolutely. And my
smartest person.
Elise kind of took up the writing mantle of all of us. She's the writer, like he was. And
Elnisa from the Challenger might be looking for you after she sees you. She hears about that writing.
But you may not be aware, though, that for a time he was on XM radio.
Yes.
That's right.
And in some of his shows, he started talking about the oil companies.
Yeah.
And what they started doing was playing oil company advertisements middle of his show. And I don't know if you're aware, he couldn't hear the ads when they were playing. So his callers would call in and tell him that they were doing that. And eventually, I think that he just got to be too much for XM radio.
Totally.
And they got rid of him and a couple of other people. And I think it was because he was too radical for that forum.
Talked about oligarchy all the time.
Yes. Yes.
So are you guys keeping contact?
But he wasn't afraid to say what he thought.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
So do you all keep in contact or keep tabs on anybody or anything that's going on in Buffalo? Because I know you've been going for a good while.
Yeah, I have Facebook friends, but a lot of my friends from Buffalo are also scattered across the country.
Yeah.
I came through there several years ago. I wanted to let my daughter see where I grew up, and there was nobody there for me to connect with.
And our house is gone. That's
our house is gone. Yes.
literally gone.
Yeah, they tore it down.
Have you all kept tabs on the last few, like the last mayoral campaign in Buffalo?
So
not really.
I have. I got a chance to interview India, and that was just a fantastic experience. And I'm sorry that she didn't win. But she was I think she was running more in the tradition of my father than anybody else. She was running as an independent, and it was clear to me that, and one of the things I pointed out to her was how much her platform was very much the platform that my father had back in 1969, and things in Buffalo clearly hadn't changed. So I think what she did was extraordinary. I hope she runs again.
Now,
this won't be the last we heard of her.
Gone, Doug. I was literal. Our house, 146 Butler Avenue, is the only house on the block, and there's no house there.
Wow.
So we can't go back to our old house and sit on the porch.
No. Was there anything before we close out? Is there anything else that anybody would like to say?
Well, let me thank you for this. It's been a huge loss, though, going through life without my dad, but it's also he's given us some tools to really just work this life in the best way possible. But I guess what I would say is resist, the things that are happening now. He would say resist, and to get organized, and to get out there, and to not let these oligarchs and these fascists take over. And so that is our task at hand. So that's what I would say.
Absolutely.
I would say that this show is in the tradition of what my dad would do, because when I was a little girl, he traveled a lot, but he would always come back with the autograph of some famous Black person, whether it was a politician or, some civil rights leader or, a visiting dignitary from overseas. He wanted me to have Black heroes. And I had a big old scrapbook full of autographs, right? And so you're kind of doing that with this show. You're giving us Black heroes, and that's so important. So important. So I thank you for that.
To piggyback off my sister, my dad took us to see Leontine Price.
Yep.
He took us to see Sherman Hemsley before he was did his
Jefferson.
Don't bother me. I can't cope.
Oh yeah. We got that album.
I was talking to a friend about that.
And in DC, when I was in high school, he took us to see James Earl Jones. And we actually got the autographs of every single one of them. Got the autographs. And I can't find them now. But the one thing that I definitely want to say, you know, not just my father's love and compassion for humanity, which drove, but I will say this too: his love for my mother.
Yeah, absolutely.
The most precious gift you can give any child is to love their mother.
Oh my God, he, you know, the way he loved. And I remember when they celebrated their 50th, was it?
Yep.
And how he just broke down in tears, and he loved my mother. I'll stop there because otherwise I'm gonna get emotional. So.
Yeah, he was able to do a lot of what he did because he had such a bulwark in my mom. He was, she supported him strongly, and she critiqued him.
Yeah.
And she instructed him and all those other things. She was a confidant, so all those things.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
Well, before we go, Elise and Ambrose, what are your shows and how can people tune in?
Extinction Rebellion Radio. We are talking about the rebellion against the climate crisis and against those who are creating the crisis. And you can listen to that on WBAI 99.5 FM New York, and it's streamed live online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ambrose?
And the name of my program is To the East, which focuses on the Black communities of Ward 7 and 8 in Washington, D.C. And it airs Mondays at 5 p.m. on WPFW 89.3 FM. I'm not streaming yet, but I will.
All right. Well, let me just say that, Lane family, it has certainly been an honor to have you all here on the Buffalo History Channel. I can remember it was earlier this year when I was back home in Buffalo, and I would go to the downtown library to look through, because they have the challenge. Alnice's daughter put the Challenger in like book form now. That's
wonderful. Excellent.
At the Buffalo Library. So I would go through there, just look for just new topics to talk about on the platform. And then I stumbled across a whole bunch of articles on your dad. And I hadn't thought about doing any political stories, but you know what? I stopped and I kind of looked through it and said, you know what? Let me give this man some play. Give this man his honor on the Buffalo History Channel. I'm certainly glad I did, and I'm certainly glad that I know Francesca Messiah reached out to all of you.
Yes.
And we were able to connect back in May and finally get you on the Buffalo History Channel to
Thank
know
you.
your truth about your dad. So,
Can I make a request?
Yes.
Doug? So one thing that there are two things that we're trying to find. We're trying to find a copy of the coloring book that my brother taught.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know whether or not it will be in the archives of the Challenger. The second thing is that during my dad's campaign, there was a poster of him. And it was a black and white poster. It was life size. It was a big size poster. And it was hand drawn. It looked like it was hand drawn artwork. If that's something that you could find, oh my God, that is.
Let me see if I can. I'm gonna definitely see if I can find that for you. Okay. Well, sir, thank you all for being here on the Buffalo History Channel.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for your work.
Absolutely.